Epstein said this to me one time, but one day he pulled me aside and he said, Maria, look at this. You see all this? And I'm like, what? And he said, this room, all these decorators coming and going and all this stuff being, all this artwork and this beautiful furniture. You see it all? I said, yeah. And he said, I got it for $1. And this is the first time I heard the name Les Wexner. He said, Wexner gave it all to me. He'll do anything for me. When I called the FBI, I'm going to tell you what I told them. I said, I know this is strange, but I said, I have a report to make on someone that I've been working for that recently kidnapped me. And they said, who are you talking about? And I said, okay, well, his name is Jeffrey Epstein. And I said, and her name is Ghislaine Maxwell. And I said, but here's what's important. It also involves the Clinton family. It involves Bill Clinton for sure. It involves Donald Trump. And I said, but the most important one, and I said that he's the head of the snake, is Les Wexner. And they said, what do you think he is? And I said, he's Jewish mafia. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean? What do I mean? Yeah. I said, what do you mean? What do I mean? I said, he's not Italian. He's Jewish and he's mafia. I said, I can't be any clearer with you. And they said, how do you know he's Jewish mafia? And then I went on to list everything that I'd seen. That was just so creepy.
Could you
and how
tell me
what
you told them about why you thought Wexner was part of the Jewish mob? Because that anything you can tell me there helps me build my case. I don't know if you read my background in Wexner in part 3 of my series or remember it, but there's definitely a lot of evidence pointing to him. Right. So there was this police report filed, and I think it was Columbus, about the murder of his tax attorney. And the police report was destroyed, but there was a copy of it that ended up resurfacing 15 years later after it was supposed to be destroyed, that linked him pretty much directly to the National Crime Syndicate, which is the Jewish and Italian mafias working together. But in the 1980s, there were these series of lawsuits and arrests made. Rudy Giuliani was actually a big part in that. It was like the pizza something, I can't remember, but they basically, the Jewish mob in New York took out the Italian mafia they'd been working with all those years and consolidated and basically just took over the whole thing. So anyway, Wexner has ties to those guys. So, but anything you can give me about what you saw that made you think, so, I mean, there's clear ties from that, right? But beyond that, anything you can tell me about what you saw, why you thought it was organized crime and not like intelligence, things like that. So anything there is helpful.
Right. So one of the things that made me think it was all the passports. I know for a fact Epstein had an Israeli passport because he showed me. Okay.
Yeah.
But, Epstein, and I'll tell you about the Wexner, like why I think he's mafia, but I just want to say too why, I thought it was really sketchy that they had like how Ghislaine had all those passports. She had a passport, a French passport, an English passport, an Israeli passport, an American passport, and there was one other. And then it made me really mad that when the FBI raided the safe, I know what was in that safe. And it's not a regular safe. It's a whole room, just so you know. So when people say a safe, they think, oh, it's the safe. It's Wexner had one too. It's a whole room you walk into. And, in that safe, he had a lot of photographs of children. And I know for about pictures of my sisters are in there because one of the people from his freaking office had told me they were in his briefcase and he kept his briefcase in that safe. He also kept everything in there because he told me he kept it for Wexner, everything. And when I asked why they recorded everything all the time, I said, is Wexner really paranoid? And he said, Epstein said, that's one way of saying it. He keeps everything. He records it all. He said, I record everything and I keep it for Wexner in the safe. So the first house I go to has pinhole cameras. Jeffrey's showing me. He's really proud of them. Second house I go to has pinhole cameras. He says, Wexner gave me this house for $1. Wexner gave me this for $1. Then I go to the apartment. They had pinhole cameras in the Victoria's Secret dressing room. Now, just to fast forward, when I was in Wexner's house, there were cameras there were pinhole cameras throughout that thing. And Jeffrey again is like, oh, look at all the pinhole cameras. And Ghislaine says, you need to be careful. We can see everything. When I would go to the restroom or take a shower or anything, Ghislaine would call me, and from the speaker, and this is in New York, sometimes in London, in different places, she would say, "Get out of the loo, get off the toilet." She would start screaming at me. And I was on the toilet. And I'm like, what's happening? So then later Jeffrey's like, oh yeah, everything's being fed to Abigail. They're watching everything. They literally watched my every move, Whitney. Who does that? My point is, who has cameras everywhere? Sharpshooters, Doberman, mafia. That's why I said mafia. I'm like, I don't know anyone who lives like this. There were little pinhole cameras in that first mansion that Annie met Jeffrey in, and in the second mansion that he gave Jeffrey for $1. They were in the building that his brother owned on 66th Street. There were pinhole cameras in all these buildings that Wexner, yes.
Okay.
All the buildings that Wexner had owned. Well, here's where they were in the building that Wexner owned. They were in the Victoria's Secret stalls. Even though I had this driver's license, and Jeffrey had given me his SUV to use while I was there, but I couldn't go outside because, Whitney, there were sharpshooters, and no one discusses this. Actual freaking sharpshooters everywhere. And anyway, the weirdest part about being at Wexner's was it wasn't the basement, because they had a basement. It was like below that, and there was a sauna in that room, like a huge sauna, and then they had like a vault, and then they had a door to an underground tunnel. And the only way I knew it was an underground tunnel was because their maid told me. I said, what is this door? Because I used to keep everything down there. And she said, oh, that's the tunnel that leads to the main house. I'm like, well, that's weird. Why would they do that? And she said, oh, you don't know? And I said, no. And she said, there's a giant 10,000 square foot floor that raises up when someone goes through that tunnel. And then they can enter the room secretly in, and then no one ever sees them. The floor raises up. She said it's 10,000 square feet. I mean, here's the thing. I lived there for 3 months, and I never once saw him. I saw Abigail on her horses, go out to get her horses. I could just see her go out, but I never once saw him. And that's why I called him like the Wizard of Oz, because he was controlling everything, but no one ever saw the guy. Okay, so Wexner set up, just so you know, nobody talks about this, but Whitney, before that first house, the house that Wexner gave to Jeffrey for $1, it's like the mansion that he raped all the children in. Before that house, there was another one. Yeah, Wexner gave him that one, and that thing was incredible. That's where Annie actually met him. I brought her over there. But that house, that mansion then was later given to Ghislaine recently. She sold it to give it to, or the townhouse, whatever. And that's how she settled with Virginia. She sold that. Oh my God, that woman. And she also had an apartment she took me to. So then she shows me all this stuff on the mantle. She takes me to the mantle. I'd never been in this apartment. It's on the Upper East Side. It was like probably 3,000 square feet. Really nice apartment. Like, I didn't have any friends that lived that well, but it wasn't like, showy like her other places. But she shows me on the mantle, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And she said, these are things my father took from the British Museum. And she's like, they're ancient relics. And I'm like, did she just say that? See, I could never repeat things to people because I think I was lying or something. And I'm like, what do you mean he took them? And she's like, he took them. He liked them. And she's like, this is an ancient Peruvian relic, and she's showing me this stuff that was 22 karat gold that had been taken from graves, but out of the British Museum. I'm like, this is not good. And then she showed me all the royals. Like, she had about like 12 photo albums of growing up with the royals. Everyone thinks that they met at Oxford. No, they did not.